All right, welcome and thank you so much for everyone joining and listening along to today's conversation on a topic that has been pretty popular in recent years. We'll get into that in a moment, but first I want to introduce the two guests that you'll be hearing from. We have Lonnie Lowery, who is the president of Nutrition, Exercise, and Wellness Associates. He has a long history of supporting scientific research and product development for adult and sport nutrition products across the food and dietary supplement industries. He also has 25 years experience as a professor of nutrition and exercise physiology and practiced as a registered dietitian for 20 years. He earned his master's degree and PhD from Kent State University in exercise physiology and later earned another master's degree in nutrition and dietetics. He led a Division I university sport nutrition program. And fun fact here, he was also a finalist in multiple regional bodybuilding competitions. We have Kim Mueller, who is a registered dietitian and board certified specialist in sport dietetics with a master's degree in exercise physiology. She has been providing custom menu planning and nutrition coaching to active individuals worldwide for over 25 years through her company, Fuel Factor Nutrition Coaching. She also developed and launched Infinite Nutrition, which is a company that creates custom blends of ingredients to address the performance and health goals of recreational and pro athletes. Kim has authored and contributed to 7 books, including Dietary Supplements in Sport Performance, which she produced with Dr. Lowery, and they are here to tell us all about it today. So thank you so much for joining me. I hope I did both of those bios justice because I think both of you have so much experience and expertise.
Thanks for having us.
So I offered a little bit of your background there, but I'm always interested in how you got to this point. So I'm going to ask both of you, how and why did you get interested in this topic of dietetics and sports supplements?
Do you want to start, Lonnie?
No, you go ahead.
All right. Well, I go way back to when I was like a preteen having elevated cholesterol levels. And I was, at that young age, introduced to a dietitian. And at that time, I was an avid soccer player. So I was always interested in what was going to enhance my performance as a soccer player, but I wanted to improve my cholesterol levels as well. So I did some nutrition coaching with that dietitian way back when. In high school, I joined the cross country team to get in shape for soccer. But it turned out that I was probably more talented as a runner than I was in the soccer realm. So my interest grew from a sports nutrition perspective on what was going to enhance my running performance. And that carried collegiately. I had the opportunity to run cross country and track at Illinois State University as well as Florida State University. During my undergrad years, I discovered that a lot of my teammates had disordered eating habits. And I was negatively impacting their performances. They were getting injured, they were getting sick, they were having stress fractures, all sorts of problems. And that kind of fueled my interest in the female athlete triad, which was my graduate research. And we all know it's kind of stemmed beyond that now. Now we have Red S and we have low energy availability. We have all those concepts that I focus a lot of my attention on to this day because a lot of my clientele are endurance athletes because I'm still competing with San Diego Track Club. I recently won a 3-day stage trail race up in the Canadian Rockies.
Sweet.
So a lot of things that I practice, and I think we, as dietitians, especially in the sports world, we have backgrounds like Lonnie does too. So a lot of our own practices are things that we've tried to enhance our own performance. And I have a lot of gratification, satisfaction, helping others reach their goals with nutrition.
Cool. Excellent. Yeah. And I'm going to ask you in a little bit later about training those female athletes. So I'm very interested in hearing about that. So Lonnie, how about you?
Yeah, that's funny, Kim. I was a preteen soccer guy.
Okay.
And I wasn't particularly good at that. But when I was 12, my sister bought me a muscle magazine because I was lifting cement and plastic weights off my floor, and I was just trying to get better at soccer. I was just trying to, build some muscle. I was a really skinny kid. And she did it as a joke, but I kind of took it seriously, and obviously there's a lot of nutrition and stuff. I mean, for anybody who's sort of younger than millennial, I guess internet used to be called magazines.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
we would look at this stuff and, there was like the training and the eating programs of the stars and all that kind of stuff. And that got me into exercise physiology. And of course, there's an enormous amount of nutrition and metabolism in exercise phys as a field. Um, so I ended up going all the way through school in exercise physiology. I did my dissertation with an uncommon type of fat and inflammation and recovery. Uh, but yeah, I mean, through all that, all the nutrition or all the research I did rather was, nutrition related. So I also got another master's, and which didn't require much more coursework. There's so much overlap, of course, with exercise phys, and um, licensed to practice and all that kind of stuff. And eventually, yeah, I did compete as an adult in bodybuilding. Um, Yeah, and I mean, there's more stories here we can go into right here, but a lot of it is a lot of misconceptions about nutrition. I just was fascinated. How do these guys get down to like, low single digit percent body fat, and then you start to realize it's very temporary and that kind of stuff. And yeah, but people doing crazy stuff with the nutrition. I just, it was partly a personal interest, and it's been a lifelong thing, just like with Kim. This isn't something I stopped in high school or college. I did it my
Right.
whole life. So still interested.
Now, you mentioned some of the misconceptions there, and I think when it comes to topics like this, information can get confusing. We have access to a lot of information, but I think sometimes it's difficult to filter through that information. Because we want immediate answers to our questions. So, in an age where we are with information so available and social media, how can we distinguish experts from influencers? Great information from relatively bad information.
Right. Yeah. That's a great point. And I'll just put in 2 cents here. I grew up on Carl Sagan. So while I was doing all this, lifting and stuff, I was also a total nerd, like all A's in science kind of kid. And he used to say that society is built on science and technology, but almost none of us know anything about science and technology, right? So science literacy is just a big deal. It was always a big thing in the courses on research design or statistics that I would teach at university, just so when AI summarizes something for you, like kind of to your point, so you see a influencer on social media, they don't, especially if it's just like, I don't know really, I don't have any background. This is just what I see. And I'm like, well, then why am I listening to you? Like, experience is important, but it's part of a total package, right? So science literacy, I think, is a huge deal. There's a section in this book, of course, about that, not to, push the book too much, but there's some stuff in there about observational studies, and we added some stuff on preclinical studies. And I think those are two things that get confused when people look at dietary supplements a lot, right? If something's observational, it's typically not causal, like cause and effect. There's some fancy things you can do with stats to make it pretty close, but it's not the same thing as a clinical trial, right? And by the same
Right.
token, preclinical work is in a test tube or a dish or in an animal. And I can tell you, like I talked about my dissertation, but what happened in animals was miraculous. What happened in people was very underwhelming. So it's not a one for one thing, So what is evidence? A whole evidence hierarchy, kind of based on clinical trials. Even if you do a systematic review or a meta-analysis, and now we're at this point in time, we're doing umbrella reviews of meta-analyses of the clinical trials. So it's a
Right.
study of other studies of other studies, and we're making these huge conclusions. And like I said, I just think it's important to understand the limitations of equipment, of what a supplement can or can't do, and be able to understand enough science, have enough science literacy that when somebody does say something, you can call out a bozo when you see one. I'm not going to name specific things, but I've seen them on YouTube. And in the past couple of years, the BBC did a video on bad science on YouTube. Oh.
Oh.
And because, so much of it is about clicks. We live in this kind of late stage capitalism, and people want clicks. And to me, it's kind of yellow journalism. They'll say something really dramatic. And Kim and I were just talking about this before we hit the record button. Um,
Mhm.
and it's more about that kind of stuff. You get more clicks for that than you do for, skepticism or, I guess we have to be careful and keep keep the scientists part of the conversation with science storytelling and all that kind of stuff. So it's not too dry, but yeah, science literacy, man.
Yeah, well, I would
And what
agree. I mean, I think people need to be continuously educated as to what credentials mean. So you
Mhm.
have the registered dietitian, and you have everyone calling themselves a nutritionist these days.
Yep.
And so differentiating what it takes to go through all the science and the research to become a dietitian, a registered dietitian, versus someone taking a weekend certification and then all of a sudden they're an expert on social media. I'd say there's more of those nutritionists than there are actually registered dietitians on those social media portals. So if you are listening to someone and the information that they're talking about is interesting, do a little research on who they are. Find out what
yeah.
their background is, see what their credentials are, and then, take everything with a grain of salt. I mean, if someone tells you that, hey, I had every time I chew a stick of gum, my performance is enhanced. Does that mean your performance is going to be enhanced because you chew a stick of gum? No.
Yeah.
We didn't talk about the carbohydrates they consume before their workout, too. So
Right. Well,
the
Right.
yeah, I mean,
quality of the science and also understanding that science is evolving.
Yeah.
So for me as a woman, I mean, I started off as a collegiate athlete and now I'm in perimenopause.
Hmm.
And a lot of the research on female athletes have been lacking. They were just in the early stages. In fact, we're pretty early in just women competing in sports. So you go back to the Boston Marathon. The first winner of the Boston Marathon, I think, was in 1972.
Okay.
And prior to that, women were sneaking onto the course to even have the opportunity to run. So we just don't have a lot of science on specific populations. And so
yeah.
understand that a lot of research is evolving. It's exciting.
It's definitely exciting, and I like some of the points that you guys bring up there. And I guess along the lines of distinguishing, fact from fiction or false information. There are a lot of people, probably watching or listening to this, or that have picked up your book that they're interested in learning more about supplements, but they're not exactly sure, what the risks and benefits might be to some of those, to consuming some of that. So what are some things athletes should keep in mind when choosing to take a sport or nutritional supplement, if I can get that out there, and kind of some of the things that they should look for?
Well, for me, I mean, the first thing when an athlete comes through my office is one evaluating what they're doing with their whole food intake. I want to
Okay,
make
yeah.
sure first and foremost that they're, I mean, I would say half of the clients that come through my office don't have adequate energy intake. So
Hmm.
let's start with the fundamentals. Let's start with the basics. If they're not consuming enough energy, they're also not consuming adequate macros to support positive adaptation to training. So before going into any dietary supplements, I want to make sure that their fundamentals are good. They're eating adequate energy, they're getting adequate macros. I also recommend looking at blood parameters.
Okay.
If I have an athlete who's complaining of fatigue, it's not uncommon for someone with low energy availability or inadequate underfueling to have poor iron intake. And
Hmm.
with poor iron intake, oftentimes they might not be anemic, but oftentimes their ferritin levels are low. And if I
Okay.
can look at their blood and see that their ferritin levels are low, even if it falls in what's textbook okay, if
Hmm.
that athlete is manifesting symptoms, they might benefit from bumping their ferritin levels up to a higher point for them, and supplementation would be advised. And the other thing is understanding the research. We know that, okay, if someone is deficient in iron, taking an iron supplement and bringing those blood levels up is going to help their performance. It's not
Hmm.
going to help someone who has adequate iron levels. So make sure that there's actually science to support, which we were just talking about, and then making sure that you're consuming a safe supplement. So third
Hmm.
party testing. So mine,
Hmm.
the supplements I use, I recommend companies that have the NSF certification, Informed Sport certification, USP label, ensuring that they have that third party testing to ensure that what you are actually consuming is clean. It's not going
Okay.
to lead to a ban for high performing athletes, and it's not going to cause any harm.
One of the things that I've seen with in like, strength sports, muscle sports, bodybuilding world, that kind of stuff is people can really get a good grasp of a narrow topic, but they never went through a curriculum. This is sort of to Kim's point about dietetics or other things. So they have big holes and they'll talk a really good game about endocrinology or something, some specific narrow thing. And then if you listen long enough, they start kind of to hang themselves, if you will. And you're like,
Okay.
oh, gosh, that's not how that works. So one of the things, again, we're back to the literacy thing, pick up just kind of a freshman 101 sports nutrition book and understand the context behind, why are you supplementing? I mean, the definition of supplement, right, is to, on top of a diet, like Kim was saying. And yeah, I mean, it can be very important. I think supplements can be a bridge over troubled water when intake is poor in something. Oftentimes, it's harder to get some kind of really dramatic results with supra-physiological amounts versus replacing a deficiency, right? Which is almost always going to help with something. And that's why I think things like fish oils are probably so effective because I think many of us do have too low of an intake of EPA and DHA and that kind of stuff. And I don't know if we'll get to talk about our supplement intake ourselves, but the point is, yeah, understand the background with that kind of entry level book. I mean, that's not unlike what we're talking about here with this book, right? When it comes to dietary supplements, there's some background on the physiology, fuel building blocks. Yes, we branch out into herbal things and a lot of other categories, but how do those fit in context? And if all you do is listen to an influencer, again, somebody can talk a good game, but if you have a conversation long enough with them, you're going to start to, smell some serious errors. So
Right.
it's the kind of thing that I would recommend.
Okay. Oh, excellent advice there. I want to switch gears just for a moment here. Now, Kim, at the very beginning, you mentioned, how you have done research with and worked with female athletes. There are a number of factors I think to keep in mind, probably, and you can obviously speak to this when training or giving advice to that population. So based on your background and in your experience, what has stood out to you most as far as working with that population?
Well, as I mentioned, when a client comes through my office, I generally start with a nutritional analysis so I can get a baseline of what their daily diet looks like. And oftentimes, one of the first things I'm correcting is ensuring that they're consuming adequate energy. Because
Okay.
if they're not consuming adequate energy, it cascades to lots of different problems, the hormonal issues and then health issues, let alone the performance side of the equation. So I want to make sure that their fundamental, their basics of nutrition are good. But female athletes are unique. So you
Mhm.
start looking through. I mean, the female athlete triad kind of piqued an interest because I had teammates who were more talented than I was as a runner. I was a soccer player who took on running a little bit later and earned a scholarship for running by walking onto the cross country team. But there were
Okay.
athletes who had full rides who were underperforming, secondary to poor nutrition. But it's evolving. We're finding that, there's slightly different physiology that's going on when someone's at a different state of their menstrual cycle.
Mhm.
And now later in life, like I start seeing my estrogen levels declining. I'm going through perimenopause, and you start looking at postmenopausal women. There's additional science looking at, okay, you know what, there's increased oxidation of carbohydrates when someone's in the follicular phase of their menstrual cycle. And that plays into their glycogen stores and possibly their ability to perform. And on the back end, during the luteal phase, energy demands can increase. So you talk about an athlete who might be under fueling, and then they have elevated demands. And if they're under fueling, their glycogen stores are compromised. And then it's twofold because of coming with their menstrual cycle. You talk about hitting the wall, and then the recovery side of the equation, it's a big deal. So, a lot of nutrition, you got to stick with the fundamentals, making sure the athlete is consuming adequate energy to support their needs, understanding that depending on where they're at in their cycle, there might be implications to changing their nutrition slightly. And again, this science is evolving.
Yeah.
You start doing longer distance running, and the recommendations, the applications are just in the infant stages right now. But it's fascinating.
If I can just interject
Yeah.
just to support that. I mean, another science literacy thing is population specificity, right? Like when Kim talks about less research on women, we used to talk about this, and even the coffee research. Women aren't simply slightly smaller men, right? We
Yeah.
can't
Right.
do that.
Yeah.
So, or older women or older women, ultra marathon, whatever. I mean, this kind of stuff really does matter. And when you take Gen Pop data and try to apply it to athletes. We talk about this on the Iron Radio podcast that I still do. Um, it doesn't always fit. It doesn't always work. So I think you have to be very cautious with, again, basic control issues like population in who, at what dose, for how long, with what equipment did you measure that? All that kind of stuff really matters. And to Kim's point, we're still the infancy of uh, you know, fleshing out all of these different subpopulations. It's just going to take time.
But
Yep.
it's exciting because we are finding, especially at different phases of our life, and for women, that there are certain supplements that one increase our body needs more of as we get older. But supplementing with certain nutrients can really enhance the recovery cycle,
Mhm.
and mitigate some of the negative symptoms that we feel as we age. So you talked about omega-3 fatty acids, and the irony, I have mine sitting right here in case you were to share. It's something
Yep.
that I implement as I'm going through perimenopause right now. I'm doing everything to enhance the recovery cycle. And there's data now that supports, I never recommended creatine for most of the population I work with because from an endurance perspective, the data just wasn't as supportive. But you start
Mhm.
looking at creatine as it relates to recovery now, especially in an aging female athlete, there's a lot of benefit to be seen. So
Similarly, oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
go ahead, go ahead.
Just similarly, I used to look at collagen that way. In the classroom, I used to say we have to be careful. Sometimes people will spike protein bars, especially with collagen, just to get that protein gram number up. But I'm like,
Mhm.
that's a very incomplete protein, not great for muscle protein synthesis. And almost like call out like that's a problem. And now that I'm older and there's more research out, especially if it's done like pre-post exercise with enough vitamin C to help put it to work and all that sort of thing, I'm a little bit softer on collagen, right? Because I'm older and I could maybe my joints are really beat up. It's like that old
Mhm.
Indiana Jones quote about it's not the age, sweetheart, it's the miles, it's the mileage. And I mean, with
Yeah.
Kim, literally mileage.
Yeah.
And so some of the joint stuff is interesting to me as an older guy who I'm always going to lift. I'm always going to bodybuild, not competitively right now.
Right.
That's just my choice. But the point being is, yeah, I would look at things now that I would have considered negative, when I was younger.
Uh, I'm glad that Kim, you brought up creatine right there because I think there are two supplements that I think a lot of people are interested in or that get a lot of attention, especially right now, that stand out to maybe coaches and parents, and that would be caffeine and creatine. So I at least want to get some of your input there because I know there's been a lot of research on those two topics, but yeah, like I said, parents and coaches might be hesitant to allow their athletes to use that, and maybe they're not sure like what the dosage should be if they let them use that. So, what can you tell us about the safety, the risks, the benefits of those two supplements?
Well, I know Lonnie has a lot of expertise in this, but I will
Yeah.
start. The safety data on creatine is excellent, so I think people can have peace of mind. I mean, even some of the adolescent athletes that are starting, and there's still controversy as to when it is appropriate to recommend, and I tend to not recommend until the collegiate level because I
Okay. Yeah.
really think that for the majority of athletes at the high school level, focusing on the fundamentals,
Mhm.
getting energy, making sure that they're focusing on nutrient timing, getting a good protein in recovery, getting the adequate carbohydrate intake, all those basics before they start with creatine.
Mhm.
But from a female perspective, I
Mhm.
think female athletes, especially later stages of life, are going to benefit from a recovery perspective with supplementation with creatine. I mean, I utilize Thorn is the product that I
Okay.
use, which is NSF certified. And I take 5 grams along with 30 grams of protein and carbohydrate after my workouts, and I do that daily. That's part of my
Okay.
supplemental protocol to enhance my recovery. And from a personal perspective, I've been able to sustain my performance now. I'm almost 50. So, and the race that I just won, I didn't just beat the 50-year-olds or 40 plus
Mhm.
year olds. I beat all the 20-year-olds. And that's a
Nice.
different conversation. There's a narrowing of performance gap with female athletes when you start doing the longer. It's a whole different conversation, but uh,
Mhm.
some of the supplements, including creatine, can be very helpful for recovery. I also think vegan, vegetarian athletes who don't have as much intake from their diet might
Mhm.
benefit from creatine supplementation.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, there's a ton of misinformation about creatine out there. I was on a podcast just recently talking about there's a youth sport website and it's on their steroids page. And I'm like,
Oh
okay,
no.
this is a
Yeah.
nutrient. It's a non-essential nutrient, right? But your body actually treats it quite a bit like carbohydrates in the way
Okay.
that it has, muscle tissue is one of the primary recipients. There's receptors, it's, transporters and all that kind of stuff. So, but the point being is, um, kind of agree, I guess, with Kim. The one conversation I would have would not be about safety or efficacy. Those things are pretty rock solid. There are hundreds and hundreds of studies. We're talking about population specificity. In many
Yeah.
populations, creatine works for things like repeat explosive performance, right, or strength performance. And it's good. Now there's a lot of controversy, I guess, about creatine and like brain function and stuff. There's some interesting data for sure. Um, it just got critiqued like literally this month that maybe we're overdoing the mental and the brain stuff. But the point is, uh, the real conversation is sort of to Kim's point, do you need it? Like,
Okay.
yes, the basics, but also what's the intent? If you're trying to dope or get one up on everybody or, you know, what are you doing? Train
Mhm.
hard, uh, eat enough calories and protein and that kind of stuff. I mean, there's a lot of ways to look at that kind of stuff. But yeah, from a safety and efficacy, I think it's great. It's fine. It's just my take on that, Kim, was always like, I think high school senior, start to think about, okay, is this something, if everything else looks like it's in place, this could be something that's helpful. I mean, even in research, right? You got to be 18 years old to give informed consent.
Mhm.
So, but before that, it's parental consent. And if the parents think creatine is a steroid, anabolic steroid, that's absurd.
Well,
So,
and then you run into the issue of not all these high school athletes are going and running and getting. My nephew actually wanted to do that, and I talked to my brother, and I said, I'm like, if he's going to GNC or just random store and buying any creatine off the shelf, you don't know if he is actually getting creatine and what else he's getting, and
Right.
that's that
yeah.
third-party testing again. So,
Or some weird
most
form
high
of
school kids
creatine.
don't have a lot of
Yeah.
money to go spend on some of these supplements that might be at a higher echelon of cost, and they'll go for the cheaper version
Yeah.
and then the problems can occur.
Yeah, over the decades, I've seen so many kinds of creatine. I mean, we did a study on creatine in '92. Like
Yeah.
that was
Okay.
back when you had to order it from Sigma Chemical. It wasn't even a sports supplement. And we got a grant at Kent State to look at that stuff with Peter Lemon, my advisor, and we were looking at that stuff. And it's just, yeah, it's just something that's amazing to me. After all these years, there's still so much misinformation. But it is one of those dietary supplements that you're not going to get a lot of pushback that there are safety or efficacy issues. A lot of the stuff that came up about kidney function, other things, it's
Mhm.
for other reasons that we can talk about some other day, but it's
Yeah.
it's not actually harming. And with you mentioned caffeine as well. Caffeine, of course, is a drug. It's not a nutrient, but it's in the food supply and it's in the
Right.
coffee that I love so much. But I've done quite a bit of writing on energy drinks and coffee as a pre-workout and that kind of thing. It sounds a little bit hippie, if you will, that I really think that the natural approach with coffee has other substances in it with antioxidant and other functions that could be really helpful from glycogen deposition to, you know, uh, HRV and recovery and all these other kinds of things. So I'm a big fan of just, a couple of cups of strong coffee before go time. And then it might not have some of the other um, unknowns that if you hyperdose, like the FDA says 400 milligrams of caffeine a day is sort of the day in and day out level, more like 1200 for acute toxicity. But um, again, back to the point of individuality, some people are hypersensitive. You really have to be careful. And for God's sake, you wouldn't take a bunch of caffeine, especially in the research supported dose, which is typically 3 to 6 milligrams per kg of your body weight. Well, what if you're one of those populations, like my buddy's a power lifter, he weighs 280 pounds. If you
Okay.
apply that per kg and you don't even think about the absolute dose that he's getting, that could be bad, right? That could be
Right.
problematic. Or, you hear stuff in the media about, oh, I think it was Panera had some caffeinated lemonade and somebody had an underlying arrhythmic condition
Mhm.
and died. So, I mean, there is some legislation right now, not to go down a regulatory slant, but there's some regulation right now to put the actual dose of caffeine on a product. And not just a can or a ready to drink, but even in restaurants and things like that. So that'll be interesting. So again, people can judge, here's how much caffeine that I want. And again, that 3 to 6 milligrams per kilogram of your body weight, that can escalate very quickly above a
Yeah.
Vivarin pill, for example, like a 200 milligram kind of
And
thing.
I've seen
So,
research that shows some research that shows that that lower dose, especially for runners, they're moving their gut around, and and
Mhm.
then if they're having something like coffee, there's acidic nature of the coffee can cause GI distress in some of my
yeah,
athletes. So
very
it's
individual.
important to one, test it in training to see how they respond. So if they're getting jittery or their heart rate is spiking, they're passing out or doing something negative, obviously, the negative aspect of it is going to outweigh the positive. But for most
Right.
Right.
athletes, smart implementation of caffeine is no doubt going to help performance. So, I mean,
Yep.
I tend to personally, because I have a sensitive gut, err on the more conservative side of that 3 to 6 milligram per kilogram body weight recommendation. So, I mean, I do
Yeah.
something simple and, like a Cliff Bar has 65
Okay.
milligrams. This flavor of Cliff Bars have 65 milligrams and one of. I'm not a coffee drinker. So one of
Hmm.
my
Okay.
bad nutritional habits to get caffeine is to drink some diet soda before a race
Mm.
too. But it works for me.
Yep.
But I always tell my athletes that are going to implement caffeine that they have to try it in training first.
Yep.
And then, the implementation of it, I have some clients who choose to use it immediately prior. So within the hour prior to racing, they will
Hmm.
take their caffeine. I have some athletes who don't like to consume it right before because of their stomach and their nerves. So they implement it with, let's say, a caffeinated gel. Like
Okay.
sometime
Yep.
during the race, on course, they'll grab a caffeinated gel.
Right. I mean, that was something that I was trying to emphasize when it comes to like, well, first of all, it brings up the question of acute versus more chronic supplementation, right?
Sure.
Creatine is more of a chronic thing. You're not going to take it and feel it right now, but
Right.
caffeine, the general recommendation in the research is about an hour before. But again, I was trying to make that point, I guess, and I'm totally supporting what Kim just said.
Mhm.
Don't just try it for the first time before a competition or like do it in training, err on the conservative side, see how you respond, as opposed to something like do it right before, um, an actual performance that matters, that really matters.
Yeah,
That's
no, I've,
folly
I've
because you
had
don't know
I've
what's
had
going to
too many
happen.
clients taking these little packets of gels that have 100 milligrams of caffeine, and they're like, okay, I'm supposed to take 60 to 90 grams of carbohydrate per hour, so I'm going to take 3 of these caffeinated gels per hour,
Oh.
and they're getting 300 milligrams of caffeine. I'm like, no, hold on, like, first responders on course are going to catch you midway through the race.
Oh.
Like the education is important too because people hear that caffeine is good, but too much of anything can start to backfire.
Mhm. I think that all sounds like great advice and recommendations. It sounds like it's kind of individual, and you kind of have to find what works for you. So, Kim, you have mentioned a few
Yes, I
supplements
have.
already, but I'm interested in both of you. Like, what do you recommend, maybe as a basic? Of course, as long as the nutritional components are taken care of first. But what do you guys kind of recommend as kind of like a basic supplement that would benefit an athlete or maybe a gen pop?
Well, for the endurance athlete, I always recommend, and this goes in line with avoiding that low energy availability and red S and female athlete triad, all those things, making sure that they're fueling their workouts. And that
Mm.
means integrating possibly caffeine, which is not energy, but carbohydrates prior to their workout. And those carbohydrates could come from something like an energy bar which is
Hmm.
basically a supplement
Okay.
with calories,
Yeah.
or it can come from a sports drink, or it can come from something like a bagel. And then depending on the duration of the workout, even if it is a shorter workout, if I have a client who's struggling to meet their energy demands on a day, I will tell them to drink sports drink during a workout. It's not going to
Okay.
hurt them. It's going to
Mm.
help them meet their energy demands at the end of the day. It's also going to promote hydration. Post workout, I recommend incorporating, of course, carbohydrates again. For the menopausal, perimenopausal woman, now the research is showing that you need a higher dose of protein. It's not
Okay.
15 to 20 grams, it's more like 30 to 40 grams of
Yeah.
protein for some women. I think that's 0.32 to 0.38 grams per kilogram body weight is the protein guidelines now for that peri and postmenopausal woman. And for some athletes, it's hard to do with whole food nutrition. I don't have a
Okay.
problem. I can do like a Greek yogurt and milk and blend up a smoothie and be happy as can be.
Mm.
If I'm out on the road, sometimes having something like a whey protein along with my creatine that I can dump into some type of fluid, a juice, will help enhance that recovery. From a day-to-day
Okay.
supplement, I'm taking the creatine right now. I'm taking 5 grams per day. I add it to my post-workout regimen. If I'm not working out, if I have a rest day, I usually take it in the evening before
Okay.
bedtime. And again, it's purely from a recovery perspective. I'm not really looking at it as it to enhance my endurance performance. I'm looking at it as more to support my recovery and also preserve my lean body mass as I get older.
Yep. Yep.
Okay.
Um, One of the nutrients that also increases the demand in women as we get older is vitamin D. So I take this
Okay.
vitamin D and K combo to help my bone health. I also take the omega-3s, which I showed earlier,
Yeah.
to also help with recovery, help with my cardiovascular health. I tend to have high cholesterol, so I'm looking at cardiovascular disease. And you mentioned Infinite. Infinite's
Yeah.
one of the companies I help launch. So when I'm out training, when I won my 3-day stage race, I was consuming 120 grams of carbohydrate, purely liquid nutrition through
Mm.
Infinite, and also consuming a half a gram of salt per hour
Okay.
and 24 ounces of fluid. So those are my key. If I were to run into issues with ferritin levels, I would add an iron bisglycinate. I use Thorne. Sports research, for those of you who are Costco members, you can find
Okay.
sports research products at Costco now, and they are NSF certified as well. So those
Okay.
are my big ones. There's certainly others that menopausal aging individuals can look for, calcium being one of them, especially if they're plant-based and not consuming a lot of dairy foods in their daily diet.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, on my
Okay.
end, there's some similar things. I mean, to me, it's you are replacing not a frank deficiency, but a relative inadequacy, if you will, with stuff like omega-3. So I take about a gram of EPA plus DHA, worth looking into, right? There's other things in there, but just EPA and DHA, I'll go for about a gram. Um, I think the capsule has 1,400 milligrams of total, oil in it, but vitamin D as well. I take 2,000 international units. It's what, 50 micrograms of D. Um, in the fall and winter, I just started, taking that just because I'm not getting enough, sunshine on my skin and that kind of stuff. We're all bundled up and all that kind of stuff, at least here, in Ohio. I've been experimenting a little bit. And you have to monitor. It's not the kind of thing where you try something and a week later, oh, that didn't work for me. My gut feeling is, it's like, okay, not everything, you're not going to feel a lot of this stuff immediately, right? Like, oh, I didn't feel my fish oil working, so I'm going to stop taking it. What do you mean? Like, for how long? But anyway, the point being is fish oils, D. I have been playing, oh, and creatine. I put the same thing, 5 grams in my coffee uh,
Okay.
in the morning. Um, Whey protein, I'll throw in my oats and berries a lot of mornings and that kind of stuff just to get my protein higher because I don't always get enough. Back in the day, I definitely did because of the sheer volume of food that I was eating, but I don't do that as much anymore. Just being in my, late 50s, I can't do that.
Yeah.
Um, ha- there are some interesting things like yeast beta glucan for immune function and immune sort of surveillance. That's a very specific issue that I have, but um, interesting data behind that, or NAC, N-acetylcysteine. It's a unique antioxidant, right? Amino acid related antioxidant. And there's fascinating research, clinical stuff about, we'll just say mental health. So fascinating stuff there. So I tend to kind of play with those. And the joint stuff I mentioned earlier, 1,500 milligrams of glucosamine, and then I do 100 milligrams of HA, hyaluronic acid. Um, I'm not super stoked. Either one of these are, the research is top notch like it is with creatine or something like that, but it's enough, and it's the price is enough that, okay, I'll give that a try and try to preserve these beat up joints from, lifting since I was 13.
Nice. Okay, very good. Very good recommendations there. This has been a very informative conversation, definitely an interesting one. But I really think that we've only kind of scratched the surface on what we can talk about as far as supplements. I want to thank you both for your time. For the listeners, if you haven't picked up your copy yet, go ahead and do yourself a favor. It's available on the Human Kinetics website, us.humankinetics.com, as well as Amazon. There's so much information in the book. It's really handy. It's kind of like an encyclopedia of sorts. I kind of looked at it that way. Over 350 of the most popular supplements, and honestly, some that I wasn't familiar with a bit before I took a look at the book. There are descriptions for each one to explain how the supplement works, how you can get it, whether it's through natural food sources like we talked about or in supplement form. Each one goes over, kind of dosing, performance benefits, safety concerns, research studies. It is so thorough. So they teach you how to read a nutrition label, something that is extra helpful, I think, for a lot of people. There is a chart of supplements for a quick reference on the benefits there. So so much information in this one resource. I highly encourage everyone to pick up their copy. Thank you so much again for your time. I really appreciate it. If you guys have anything else, just real quick, I will give it back to you for a final take-home message and let everyone know how they can keep up with all the great work that you guys are doing.
You want to go ahead, Kim?
Thanks for having, and again, this has been a labor of love. I've always been fascinated by sports nutrition, so it's really been fun to kind of delve into the research and see how science has evolved over the last decade plus since I last published this book. But stick with the fundamentals, and also I recommend kind of keeping a training log. See how your nutrition is impacting your training. And when you start implementing or exploring the option of maybe some of the supplements that we presented today, see how it's impacting your adaptations to training. See how you're feeling, if there's any benefit, and have fun with it.
Yeah.
Science is cool.
I'll dovetail on that with one thing. I just saw this, and I just wanted to bring it up. It says, this is from the Supply Side Supplement Journal. I'm sure Kim's familiar with this. Studies suggest consumers misunderstand supplement health claims. So it might be worth, this is by, let's see, Hank Schultz. Just something, I don't have any affiliations with these guys at all. Just, it's interesting, right? The ongoing need for education like this book. Yes, it is a catalog, but there's also information at the beginning about how to read science. There's special population stuff in there, and the importance of that. And so there's also, and the icons, and we try to simplify, like, on some level, evidence and a professional opinion on what's the state of the evidence of the science on each one of these things. So yeah, because studies, the constant, barrage that we get, people are still not understanding supplement claims. So it just seemed very timely, right, with this book coming out.
Yeah, very much so. Again, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it, and have a great rest of your day.
You too.
Thank you.